Man, glad you're here this morning. Standing out front, it may be the fourth most beautiful day in the history of days, and so enjoy it because it may not all be this way. But I was just watching a bunch of you come in, and for some of you got up this morning and had 30,000 different things you probably could have done and had all the temptation. And for some of you who got your spouse up or your kids and got them all put together, and all week has been long and busy and hurried. Man, I'm grateful that you would take time to be faithful to this thing. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you this morning. For me, it already has. Just sitting through music, what Chuck has challenged us with earlier, that stuff is already a win for me. We're in the second week of a series called What Would Jesus, not What Would Jesus Do, but What Would Jesus Undo? Last week, Jeremy got us off and running really well and talked about this issue of spiritual indifference. I want to pick up right where he left off last week, and I want to talk about something that I know Jesus would undo. It's not theoretical, because it is something he worked really hard toward undoing while he was on earth. And I'll give you a little spot in Scripture where you can see what he was doing. And then I think what you'll find is that I need this message. I've had a horrible week, because a couple weeks really in preparing it, because it has applied to me so much, and I hate it when that happens. I want to help the other people of the world, but leave me alone. And God keeps bugging me with my own stuff. Sooner or later I'm going to speak on something that doesn't affect me, but so far I'm batting 0 on that. So here's where we're going to start this morning. Years ago, Leslie and I worked with youth in a church, and we did all these cool trips in our 412 student ministries here. I don't know if you know somebody with a teenager student that could plug in. Man, those guys are doing a great job with the youth in our communities around here. And that's kind of what we did. Every year we took a trip or two to the Buffalo River. And that not too far from here, we in the Arkansas side, and we would do a float trip there. And we did it every year, and we would put in a little place called Ponca. And if you've ever floated on the Buffalo National River, you know right where that is. It's not the very top part, but it's close to the top part where you put in points. And we would go, and this year we had like almost 100 high schoolers that were going to float the Buffalo with us, and a bunch of crazy adults that were goofy enough to get up and give their time and put up with all of that stuff. We were going to float down, and we had a campsite set up. We'd float to there, and the next morning we'd finish up, take out, and go home. And the only problem with this year is when we got ready, it rained the entire week before we went. And the north or the high side or the top end of the Buffalo, when it's at high levels, like people come from other places to run that. Like people come because you can get some class 3 and then class 4 and then above at flood stage rapids. Well, we're taking people, let's just be honest, there's some of these teenagers who just figuring out which end of the paddle was a big challenge. And so I'm calling the place every day going, are we going to be able to do it? And it's dropping really fast, and we get about 48 hours of no rain before we go. Even the morning we're leaving, I'm calling the guy going, hey, listen, parents are weird about this. Like if you take them on a trip and one of their kids dies from it, they are ticked off. And I wasn't really concerned about the kids. I just didn't want them mad at me. And that was really how I was looking at it, because you see why I got out of youth ministry now, don't you? And so I was just going, he's like, I think we can do it. When we got there, I think he looked at us, and then he got more worried. And I was telling him some of these guys are just beginners, and he's like, well, are you pretty good at this? And I go, oh, yeah, that's not really the case. I've floated enough I bring groups, but I'm not particularly good at this. And he's like, so he made up a strategy. He said, I'm going to put one of my guys in a kayak up in the very front. Or actually, he said, you go in front, you and your wife. I'll be one of my guys here. I'll put another one of your leads here, and then I'll be in the very back in a kayak. So whatever happens, we will be able to take care of everybody. And that all sounded good, except when the differing opinions about this, and my wife is here, and I love her. Oh, man, do I love her. But she's just wrong about this one. We get in our canoe with still water, and it flips. The poor guy at the Outfitters, I just remember looking up at him as we're trying to get all of our stuff back in, and him going, oh, dear Lord. You're the leaders, huh? And so what I was worried about, this is kind of what we typically floated. See, Buffalo Outfitter Center, that's typically the kind of trip we went on. It was like this. And you paddled a little bit, and every now and then there was a little rapid-ish, and you went through that, and then you paddled a little bit more, and you did your 8 miles, and then we camped, and the next day you did 4 or 5 more. It was a pretty sweet little trip, and it's beautiful, and the sun would be shining, and that's what we're used to. The fear was that the water was up. I just want to tell you in advance, it was not this that we were going to be doing. When I say the water was up, it wasn't like that kind of up, because, see, then we would have lost all of them, but I wouldn't have cared because we would have lost me. It was more like this kind of water that we were running in. I think for people who've never paddled, when you see huge white water, you go, oh no, we are not doing that. See, it's easy because you can see the danger. The problem with this kind of water is up there, it looks like just sweet sunny day. But there were some places where the river was a little out of its banks and where the current was pushing you in places you wouldn't normally go. There were little rock formations that normally you would go through that you couldn't even see because the water was up, but the problem was there was some downed trees and it pushed you in some other places. And here's the reality. If you didn't do something, the current was going to take you somewhere you didn't want to be. And so we gave all these instructions to all of our paddlers. One, we were like, the ones who were holding, it's like, grab your paddle, and you may want to get down on your knees. And they were just going, what? We did this before. I go, no, but it's going to be a little harder this time. But here's the big thing. If you just go where it takes you today, you're going to spend a lot of your time upside down. You're going to be pinned in some spots you didn't want to be pinned into. And listen, not trying to overly scare you, but you're going to find you may face some things that you're not able to get out of. Well, I think that is true in life. If you go where the current takes you, for a while you can survive at that pretty well. But there will be points in your life where if you go where the current takes you, if you just sit up on your seat and smile and hold your paddle whatever way you've been taught to hold it, if you do that, you're going to end up in some spots where you'll end up upside down in your life. And you may be pinned against some things with a lot of stuff happening. And the truth is, for many of us, you may be in a position where you don't know how to get out of it. I like to call that whole philosophy drifting. Drifting is simply, if we defined it, we could say drifting is a continuous, slow movement from one place to another. It is basically just saying, I'll go where I go. I mean, life is pretty linear. You start at birth. We all pretty much start out there. We all end at death. So far, everybody's pretty much got that figured out. And you just kind of meander your way through. You go to school till they tell you you can quit, and then you stop. You go to work, you do your things, you try to survive. You just kind of go where the current pushes you. And drifting is the undo that I think Jesus began to deal with even while he was on earth. What would Jesus undo? He would undo drifting. Because drifting is so dangerous because it is a slow movement from one place to another with the assumption that the next place will be okay. And that is just a lie. And there's some of us in this room with stories where drifting has occurred in our life. And we one day woke up and said, how did I end up like this? And even if it's not you, and it is you, you just may not know it yet because all of us have this. It's 1 out of 1. Even if you don't realize it's you, we all know somebody where it's really obvious. The good thing about drifting is we can notice other people drifting very easily. Just from a distance, because drift is obvious. From way back here, you go, they don't need to be over there. That was us. Paddling along, you looked and go, what are they doing over there? Hey, paddle back this way. Well, unfortunately, in life, when it is you, it is much harder to know. Now, we've got a car now, and it has the dumbest technology in the history of technology. Every time I cross the line, it beeps at me. As if I didn't already have things in life that beeped at me when I was driving. That inner conscience that I need to do better is what I'm talking about. In my world, we live in West Tennessee, there's potholes. I got to avoid those things. And they give you that whole big road to be used. Whoever said you had to stay in that, those are suggestions. And now I got that thing that beeps every time. I'm just telling you, I found where that button was to turn that off. because it is not the boss of me. But you know what it is? Literally, it is just, they put rumble strips on the highway. You've got little beep when you cross. It's just something to say, hey, watch out. Well, this morning, I want to look at a little passage in Scripture, and only goal for the morning is just to say, hey, watch out. And maybe that's not needed for you right now, but it may be just what you need right now. What I found in the last few days is it has been what I needed. So in the end, isn't that the most important thing? In Matthew chapter 15, there's just, read you 3 verses. It's about some people that are talked about in the Bible a lot. If you're kind of new to the Bible thing, they may sound unfamiliar. If you've been around church, they're super familiar. This is what it says, Matthew 15:1. It says, then some Pharisees and teachers of the law, so super religious leaders, they came to Jesus from Jerusalem, and they had a question for him. Now, these guys often had questions. There's 2 kinds of questions. There's questions where you ask and you're curious, and then there's questions with an exclamation point at the end. It's really, I'm wanting to make a point, but I'm going to ask you a question. It's this game we play. It's called passive-aggressive in the real world. It's like, well, let me just ask you this then. And they didn't really want to hear his answer. They just wanted to get an answer, so they had something to twist. They were politician before politician was cool. So they came to him with a question, and here was their question. They traveled from another place. This will tell you a little bit about them. They traveled from another place, not in a car, like on a foot or on a camel or a donkey. They traveled somewhere to ask this mind-blowing question. Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? Doing what, you ask? They don't wash their hands before they eat. Saddle up the camel, Lucy. We got to go ask him about this. Hey, everybody, pack your lunch. We're finding that guy. You know why? Because I'm going to ask him about this. Why do the guys who hang out with you not wash your hands enough? Now, all of the super germaphobes in the room are going, and what is wrong with that? And just settle down. Because good news, this isn't about germs. It would have even made sense if they had said, you're going to cause disease. No, they couldn't have cared less about that. They had people to worry with that. Their big issue was, are you breaking my tradition? Now let me just tell you this before we go too far. The Pharisees and Sadducees and religious leaders of that day, they're our favorite bad guys in the Bible. I mean, if they're kind of the people who got Jesus killed when you get right down to it, so it's easy to not like them, although we wouldn't have communion if it weren't for them. For us, it's easy to see their stupidity in life, but I just want to say this, and maybe I'll be the only person that ever says this. I don't think they were all bad. I don't think most of them grew up and said, someday I want to become a religious leader because I'm just going to screw people's heads all up. I'm going to take what Jesus has and just mess the whole thing up. I don't believe that's true. I think most of them went into this with good intentions, that we want to help people and we want to take what we've been taught and hand it to another generation, and it's valuable. I don't think they were just horrible people that got into it for the cash. But over time, they drifted. They drifted from what was really important to what became important to them, and that switched a lot. As a matter of fact, there were things that the Bible had, or the scriptures had showed to them, and then often what they did is they just took those and stood them on their head and added more. They didn't delete them, but they often added. And this is one of those. Now, there was a tradition in their day for a good Jewish person that before they ate, or before they made a sacrifice, they would become ceremonially clean. It wasn't just clean like, yeah, I got some Germ-X, Purell. It wasn't about that. It was a ceremony that set aside you and your body for what you were about to do. And there were a lot of rules, and I won't even go into all of them. But this one in particular was anything that you touched that would make you ceremonially unclean had to be done away with. For instance, if you touched anything dead, or if you touched pork. See, I'm already struggling just with that whole side of it. Like barbecue, real barbecue, not the beef kind, real barbecue. He serves the way God intended, real barbecue. See, I've made new friends now in the room. They're like, that boy knows what he's talking about. Real barbecue was out of line. If you touched it, literally, you couldn't go to make a sacrifice and you couldn't eat because you needed to be sanctified, set apart, cleansed. And the way they would do it, there was a prescription of how much water and where the water would come from and how you were to wash your hands. If you had touched anything unclean, you couldn't until that. And then they would wash their hands, and there's just this ridiculous how much you would use, and there's a measurement or two in Hebrew that they would use, and it's just this certain amount. And they would hold their hands in a very specific way, and water would be poured. And they did it because if the unclean part of you washed down on the other parts of you, now that was unclean. So you would hold your hands in a way where the water would just drip. And then when you were finished with that and they poured it, you would turn your hands this way to let the water... This is what they rode the camel to talk about. Your guys are just eating willy-nilly. I'm hungry, I think I'll eat something. They're doing none of this and none of this, and we're not having a part of it. I think they broke a tradition. This is what they were freaking out about. Somewhere over the course of time, these guys who had been given truth, and they were supposed to advocate truth and share truth, this is what they had come down to. And we wonder why people hate church sometimes. Because that has not stopped over 2,000 years. We've just found new things to be upset about. New things to get all weirded out. It's like they missed the point so they could make their point. And it just happens to people. Well, with these, they came to Jesus with a question, and unfortunately for them, they got an answer. Down in verse 7, this was his response. These people, talking about these religious leaders, they honor me with their lips. Well, that ticked them off because they didn't say he was God or any part of God. So when he put me in there, they were already like, oh, who do you think you are? Another question that he liked answering. They honor me with their lips, and then gets down to this other issue, but their hearts are far from me. And then this phrase, they worship me in vain. You know what he said? They're going through the motions. And I'm not impressed. That going through religious motions is far different than seeking or worshiping God. It's a different thing. And you know what he'd say in today's world? Humming along to the song. Showing up on Sunday. While not a bad thing by any means. There was never anything wrong with washing. Good, clean, washed hands. Heck yeah. He was just saying that what's going on, they're going through the motions, but they are missing the point. And so it tells us that we can do things that look right and not get much out of it, and it not honor God. That's drifting. Going through the motions can be obvious to the people around us, but sometimes not so obvious to us. So here's my question to you. Is there anything in your life, if you were to say, here is me at my best, I remember a day, and maybe you would say today, this is the best version of me there's ever been. I think I'm living closer to God, I'm caring for people better, I am at my peak when it comes to spiritual life. Maybe that's you today, and if it is, yay, and I'm glad you're here. But for many of us, you would say, yeah, I think there's been times in my life, well, wherever you were to hear, that is called drift. We drift, and often we don't know we're drifting because we go through all the right motions that keep us familiar and comfortable. Well, here's some drift possibilities. I just listed 4, and then we'll kind of wrap up the day after those. Maybe none of these hit you. I started this message thinking that this would help you, and then over time, these are the 4 that I think I needed. And so if you're nothing like me, just figure out your own as we go, because it's not comprehensive. The first one is to drift from being with to being around. And this is a societal thing. We used to value people and time with people as a with thing. Time with people. Time with God. Me in my life, there have been times when I felt like God, and I know it's just weird language, and if you're kind of new to the church thing, and this weirds you out just a little bit, I totally get it, because it's just weird. But if you've experienced it, you go, well, it's not weird. Why is that weird? I felt really near God. We sang a song a minute ago about God in the fire with me, and it uses language over and over about the nearness of God in those times. Well, if you've never experienced that, you're like, what? But if you have experienced that, you know what it is like. You literally feel like God's presence, not in some super cosmic weird way, just in reality, you feel at peace with a nearness to God. And we used to talk about those things. Even with people, I'm really close to my friend. Now what we do, because there's so many avenues to hear about God, to talk about God, we don't necessarily require a lot. Man, I can go to my favorite podcast, or I can go to my favorite YouTube, and I can hear about God all the time. And a lot of us have substituted nearness to God to being around God stuff. I can listen to all my favorite speakers, and they're like talking, and I'm like, yep, thumbs up. That's when you know you're spiritual, when you're listening to Christian stuff and giving it one of those. Yeah, hello. It's like being with people. There was a time when we thought being around people face to face and sharing life was important, and now I don't really even have to do that because I can just keep up with them. I can just read what they post. And the crazy thing is it kind of fills my need. Like when I feel isolated, I can just pop open some stuff and I don't feel isolated anymore. I'm in a bunch of people's lives. And I just want to say, really? When you hit a bad spot in life and you need a friend, don't cut it. When you feel alone in the world, somebody's post won't get you there. There's a difference in around and with. And I'm afraid it happens with God, that I can just turn on my K-Love. I can just listen to my deal. I can just come to church and stand in a spot and just let God stuff go past me. But there is a difference in me engaging and me spectating. And that's one of the things we drifted. Here's the bad thing. It's hard to tell the difference at first. And then you can make around become your norm, and you won't even realize with is a possibility. So sometimes we drift from with to around. Second one, this. We can drift from caring for to caring about. This is a cousin to the one we just did. The reason this is in there, last week at the end of the service, last 2 weeks, I've made an announcement and made it beautifully, by the way. I know it's the highlight of all your service. You try to get through this so you get to the announcements. Everybody does. It's okay. You can admit it. It doesn't hurt Jeremy's feelings. Everybody just loves announcements about our Thanksgiving meal boxes that we're sending out. So one of my friends, the guy that was up here earlier named Chuck, the guy with the Movember going on. Yeah. We were sitting having lunch on Wednesday or Thursday, and we're just hanging out in our little room at our office, and he said, we're talking about this event and what we could do and things this week we need to get done, and he said, are we telling people that even if they don't want to shop for stuff, if they'll just give some money, we'll send them somebody to go shop for them? And we're like, yeah. He's like, well, we call this We Love 731. I'm not sure, like, sending somebody is a lot of love. Like, well, the people who get the food will feel like it was love. Because that was my smart aleck answer because I didn't like what he said. That was Wednesday night, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up. Man, I don't like that Chuck guy, by the way. I've never liked him. Well, I did, but as of Wednesday, I woke up and I was just sitting there thinking. In my family, for a lot of years, as my kids grew up, every Christmas we would set aside some money and some time, and we'd find somebody in our church or in our community who was really struggling financially at Christmas, and we would go together as a group. We'd either cut down at some cool Christmas tree place, or we'd buy them the best Christmas tree in our area. And then we would do a little detective work, and when they weren't home, we would sneak over and we'd put it in front of their house and put a big bow on it, leave them a little note that says somebody cares about you. And then we would listen. Sometimes I would get a text from somebody going, hey, do you have any idea who brought a Christmas tree to our house? And I just lie because God doesn't mind if you lie about stuff like this. I go, no. And the kids would hear it, and at church they'd hear them saying, I don't know, I couldn't believe it. We have had such a tough year, and my wife lost her job, and I was injured, and we had to mess, and I was sick, and we had that, and all the bills, and and then somebody just left it, and the kids would go, Dad, did you hear that? And we'd be like, yes, that's who I am. And then I found myself this week saying that the least amount I could do to fill out my requisite thing for a Thanksgiving box is exactly what I was looking for. I don't want to have to know a poor person. I don't want to have to do anything. Here's a couple of bucks. There, poor people, I care. When the heck did that happen to me? I'm not talking about you. I don't care how it plays out for you. It's your deal, you and God. I'm just talking about, when did my heart decide that that was adequate for me? Because that's not who I am. It's not who I've been. It's not who I want to be. As long as I don't have to touch anyone or do anything, I care about people in 7312. And what Chuck did is he just called BS on that. And he ruined my night's sleep. And he ruined my whole message because I had to go change it. It was all done on Wednesday, and then I had to go Thursday morning and start again. And he meant that yesterday I had to get my daughter and my wife, and we had to go together and buy the stuff, because what I want to do is say, it matters so much, we'll change our schedule, we'll adjust. Because you know what, there have been times in my life when I have needed and people have loved me well. They did it with dignity, and they did it with care, because I mattered to them. Man, I don't want to forget that. I know the world is a busy place. But if we're too busy to love people at a time called Thanksgiving, seriously, have we drifted a little bit when the way we feel better is to do a little bit from a distance and then move on as long as I can stay in my heated home with my well-washed hands, well, be warm and filled. Boy, that is not who we are as a church. And hey, I know there's a million different ways to get it there, and the best you can do may be just that. And if it is, then more power to you. I'm really not talking about this for you. I'm talking about it for me. But man, that's not who I want to be. Sometimes I feel like I'm more concerned about caring about from a distance than caring for. I'll give you the third one. Sometimes we drift from prioritized to practical. Prioritized is saying I want first things to be first. That's why I said at the beginning, way to go for you even being here this morning. For some of you, this is a priority. Not because you just leave at the end of one of these and you're like, my whole life has changed. Bam! I'm a new me. Because it's not that way. Sometimes you just leave and you go, okay, we did it again. I get that. Me too. There's not an epiphany every time you walk through the doors. There's nothing magic here. I hope it encourages you. I hope it gives us collectively the will to do what we need to do. But the fact that you prioritize it as a first thing, the fact that your kids growing up say, you know, when I was growing up, my mom and dad said God was more important than fill in all the other blanks. But sometimes we move from prioritized to practical and we go, we got a lot of things to do and 7 days to do it. I'm just going to do what I have to do when I have to do it. And if I can fit God in, I will. And sometimes we'd never say it that way. I'm just trying to fit God in where I can. No, I mean, lightning bolt kind of thing. Nobody says that. But sometimes, you know what? In my life, I can drift and not know I'm drifting. I'm just saying, hey, might want to be careful. Hey, beep, 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 crossing the line. Beep, beep, beep. Sometimes we drift from prioritized to practical. We drift from purpose to progress. Sometimes it feels like what we do is we do things and then say, God, please bless what I did. Instead of saying, God, why am I on the face of the earth? I'm going to do that. Sometimes I find myself praying about things that need no prayer. God, I'm trying to find my purpose in life. And then I open my Bible and it tells me my purpose in life. The reason I exist on the face of the earth is that somehow I would reflect God's goodness or God's glory or God to others. The reason, the day I can't do that, I won't be here anymore, so I know I'm breathing today, so that's still my priority. It is still my purpose. In my job, in my family, in my neighborhood, in my life, I know, well, I've got to make a living. Well, of course you do. But if you think the reason you have your job is just to make a living, you have lost. You have drifted from your purpose, and you've landed in something called progress. I got to move my way up so I can get the next and do the whatever. Sometimes we do it as parents. We set aside our life to provide for our kids what we didn't have, and the number one thing we're supposed to provide for our kids is an example or a reflection of Jesus. The kids who end up having done the best vacations and the best birthday parties and all of that is stinking awesome if you can do it. But listen, the kids at the end of the game who say, what changed my life, never say that. They say, I had a mom or a dad who day after day demonstrated Jesus to me. I remember waking up as a kid, teenager, really remember I was dropped a lot and don't have a lot of early childhood memories. It's my story. But as a teenager and even as an adult going to my family's house, I remember waking up a lot of times in the morning, kind of walking down the hall and finding my mom kneeling down at her little recliner by her little TV tray. And far more than anything she ever told me, she demonstrated what was most important in life. And I'm nearly 40 years old now. And that stuff, shut up. That stuff's still playing out in me as real today as the day it happened. They did other cool things for me, and I can think of times they gave and they sacrificed and did, but I'll tell you what invaded my space was watching them do the things that were right and giving me a little glimpse of what God was like. It's what's lasted with me. And I'm not saying don't do other cool things. Man, if you understood that, that wasn't what I intended. I'm just saying if you're not careful, we will fill our measuring space up by saying, I am providing for them the very best things in life. Just be careful not to confuse the very best things with the most things. Because the only thing you can offer them is an example that'll always stand the test of time. So there's some ways that we drift. Let me just tell you the scary part about drifting. I read an article this week, and it's the dumbest article. You don't need to go read it, but if you want to, it's kind of cool. Google it. Post-mortem movement is a real thing. That you can drift so far that you're kind of dead in the water. Did you know that dead people keep moving up to 18 months? Their bodies keep moving. Now they're using time-lapse photography, and they've got a little place in Australia where they test these. They actually lay dead people there and let them decompose and watch, and they move continuously for up to, they don't know how long, because it's an 18-month study. It came out in September. It's been going 18 months, but not like twitch, like move. Like they're finding that arms are in different positions than they were 4 weeks ago. How cool is that? Dead people move. I grew up in a Baptist church. We weren't allowed to move even when we were alive. So how crazy is that? They're finding it really valuable because they're trying to figure out sometimes when they find somebody in a murder scene or something and they assume the body is where it's always been in exactly the position, they're finding out you can't live with that assumption. But I'll just tell you this, in Christianity, people post-mortem movement is a real thing. That sometimes we have so died on the inside and we're still just going through the motions on the outside. And the struggle is, it looks almost the same from outside in. It's hard to know what's going on in my heart. It's hard to know what's going on in my mind. It's hard to know. The result of long-term drifting is what I like to call stranger danger. The problem is I can walk through God motions, spiritual motions, church motions over and over again. I can eat that little piece of bread and drink that little cup of juice. I can stand while we're singing those songs. I can sit through a message. I can sign up and do whatever. I can go through all of those, and the truth is be a million miles from God. The problem is there will be a day when I need God to be real in my life. I don't need him to be my add-on feature to my car. I don't need him to be my extracurricular. I don't need him to be my part-time hustle. I need him to be God. And the problem is, when I have drifted so far away in my day-to-day life, that I'll often find when I need him most, God feels like he's a million miles away. Stranger danger. Boy, it's hard to trust a God who you don't know and who we keep at arm's length. And so can I just say this to you? There is this horrible danger in life that we will begin to drift. And as we begin to drift, we won't even notice. And if we drift where the current takes you, it will take you places you never intended to go. And eventually you'll find yourself in spots you never thought you would be in. And it won't be because you're a horrible person. It'll be because you are a person with good intentions but bad habits of not making God the most active part of our life. For many of us around here, there's remedies to that. One of them is when you show up on a Sunday morning, say a prayer before we start that'll help you engage with God, not just engage with the room sitting here. That's not so hard. Part of that is when you're home today, when you wake up in the morning to be able to say, God, help me as a parent, as a husband, as a wife. Help me as a friend, as an employee. Help me live what I was created to live out. And it's not just go through the motions and we made it through another week. Thank you, God. It's to say, God, if you've got an intention for me, I am aware that I am here to reflect somehow what you're like in my life. It's not so hard. And God will help you with that. Maybe for some of us, it is literally to get up off of our chair and go pick up some stuffing mix and some Jell-O pie and to go to ourjourney.news and go down to that and list somebody who maybe it could go to, because we need to be caring. If you don't know anybody in our community who needs help, maybe this would be a good time to meet one. It might mean that we're going to give some details next week a little bit more, that on the 23rd you might want to come deliver one. But maybe we need to quit caring about, and we just need to start caring for, because it might change the way we do life. Let's pray and we'll get out of here. So God, I'm a drifter and didn't even know. I prepare messages to help people not do what I do. I don't even know when that happened. But I am not going to live that way. I don't have a million years to follow you. And I'm going to use what I have as best I can. And so I'm glad you have forgiven me. You know we've had this discussion already. But for people sitting in this room that maybe I'm not as different than they would think, just going through the motions, I wonder if you would just point out to us where we're doing that and help us rectify that deal today. Even if it's just little baby steps forward, would you help me be the person you created me to be? Would you give me a little beep or a little nudge or grab the steering wheel and pull it out of my hand if that's what's necessary? Because I don't want to drift. We ask it in your name. Amen.